Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for the Mindful Eye and the Workshop Spotlight feature of the Mindful Eye website, where I work with images that have been recently created on my location workshops. We're going to be looking at this beautiful landscape architecture image that was created by William, who's from California. He shot this image on my Spirit of Whidbey Island workshop. It's working at ISO 800, f5.6 and 30 seconds. Pentax DSLR is the camera, effective focal length of 24 millimeters, and I want to start off right there. This is a fantastic focal length for shooting these kinds of shots where you'd like to show a strong sense of place, foreground, middle ground, and background. Put an architectural subject like this in a wonderful context. If we go much wider than 24, let's say 20, 16, 14, we will have super wide, so we can create a strong sense of place, but we'll start to get perspective distortions, one of which will be the potential to, from a size standpoint, diminish this subject to the point where it just doesn't have the same kind of weight that we might want it to have in the overall context of the shot. I know for myself, when I'm shooting landscape architecture, shooting big architectural interiors, most of the time I will avoid, if I can, going wider than 24 millimeters because of all kinds of perspective distortion. Very powerful focal length for these kinds of shots. Wanted to mention shutter speed here, 30 seconds. William is able to get to a very long and potentially very powerful shutter speed here without using a bunch of neutral density, because we got to the location very early. Got here about an hour before sunrise, so we are in very low light. So I just want to talk about one of the very powerful things this long shutter speed is doing for the composition. Most of the subjects here are static: the beach, the boardwalk, architectural subjects, the other side of the cove. But then I have two subjects that are moving: tidal movement on the surface of the water, and then the clouds are moving across the sky. 30 seconds is long enough that with this movement, the camera on a tripod, all of the surface quality of the water and the sky, or in other words the texture, is gone. So this becomes completely smooth. And at one time, that's really helping to simplify this image and make it more dynamic. If I have a lot of surface texture everywhere in an image, it can become chaotic and it can overwhelm. One of the beautiful things about this image is we move on a continuum in an implied way that's very dynamic, from totally smooth to the most textured area of the image. The long shutter speed here is allowing two very important design principles to be at play in this composition: the design principles of variation and of proportion. So just want to really encourage you, if as a landscape photographer you're not getting there super early and you're not staying late at night, to work these times of day, quantities and quality of light, the very early twilights in the morning and the very late twilights in the evening. In addition to being able to get to long shutter speeds without a bunch of filtration, you're also going to be able to work with qualities of light that will produce colors that are extraordinary. If you're shooting a situation like this where you have a mix of natural existing light and man-made light, you'll get a color palette that you can't get at other times of day. I also like to make a real strong case for shooting these morning twilights. It's just simply easier, being a human being, to stay up late once you're up than it is to get yourself up in the morning. But the very early morning time represents, for me as a landscape photographer, the greatest potentials for shooting landscapes. If somebody said, "Hey Craig, you got to choose to jettison one or the other, sunrise or sunset," I wouldn't even have to think about it. I'd get rid of the sunset. Even though the light can be warmer in the evening because there's more particulate matter that's kicked up during the day in the atmosphere, I truly believe, having 20 years of experience shooting both early and late, there is a lot more potential for dynamic changes in weather and quantities and quality of light in the morning. If you live in an area where you have any potential for fog, you know that that's a much greater potential in the morning. Just have a lot more potential for stacked layers of weather. The other thing that I love about the morning is, because it's more difficult to be there, you tend to have locations to yourself. That helps me in a couple of ways. It's practically easier to not be shooting in a place where there are a lot of other people moving around. It also means that it's more quiet. I know for me, from a creative standpoint, having physical dimensions of space, like literal space around me and space in terms of sound, can really help me. And I potentially, depending on the situation, but overall I think this is true, I'm mostly like starting with a blank palette, so not seeing any color and being there when, to my eye, it looks close to black. and then feeling the colors come into that void. That tends to make it easier for me to do the work that I do as a photographic composer. One of the things that I love about this image, if we want to talk about design from a foundational standpoint, and be very important, there's a quality of line here that's simplifying the image, and that is leading line. Leading line is where we have a line that takes the viewer to an important image within the overall image of the photograph, and this is a very powerful area. It's an iconic spot on the whole island. It's also very graphic. It's very high value in terms of color, and to say the least, so many of the qualities of line that are either implied or they're contouring lines going on the outside of a shape are taking the viewer right to one of William's main subject in this photograph. Another very important foundational thing that's happening here is extraordinary camera position. I am up here with most of the rest of the workshop on the boardwalk, great location too. William has made the extra effort to climb down here to the beach, and he is working low to high relative to most of the subjects. And this is one of 4 basic extraordinary camera positions, and it can do 2 very powerful things for you. Number one, it can simplify. If you get low, you're going to get a lot of ground with a wide lens like this. You're going to cut down on the middle and get a lot of sky, and the sky and the ground tend to be much simpler than what happens in the middle of your shot if you're shooting from chest level, and you start to get a lot of perspective overlay distortion like we have in here that can create a lot of chaos and a lot of tangencies and mergers. In addition to simplifying, low to high can also just create a much more powerful emotional response in the viewer. In the lexicon of cinema, when we're talking about shooting low to high, we're talking about creating a feeling for the subjects that we're looking up at of being much more imposing and much more heroic, and then just the arc of our life, being very small as children and looking up at everything, and the feeling that that gives us people that we honor and we build statues to or put on a pedestal. There's so many different ways that putting the camera low and pointing up creates a totally different emotional vibe at the level of imagination for the viewer. Another thing that I love about this image is color. There are several different things that are happening here from a color standpoint that I think are powerful things for you to think about as a takeaway from this video if you're really challenged by composition and you're working on getting better being a visual composer. I want to show you a slide from a talk that I do on design that I give in my workshops. I'm doing an updated version of that talk at the end of this month in my free Savannah Photography Weekend last week in August. Would love to see you there. You can find out more about it by clicking on the ad for it on the home page of the Mindful Eye website. William has 3 things going on here out of 4 that I talk about as a way to simplify color and work with color in a more powerful way. He just has a few colors. He's limited the number of colors. There's a real strong sense of color relationships that are powerful and congruent with the way that it looks like he wants me to move in the image. And essentially he has a kind of composition where the subjects within the frame that create a shape are a color, and then as you move from one subject or one shape to the next, colors also change in addition to the shape or the idea or the image changing. Doesn't have so much of this, but he's shooting in very strong twilight with a real strong overlay of man-made warm light, sodium vapor and tungsten. So this isn't the kind of image where I might look to do what I do in a lot of my shots, which is try and have an aspect of warm, cool, and then pick places that can be color neutral. Williams' qualities of light in this shot really don't support the believability of having areas that could have a real strong sense of color sea level. He's doing a beautiful job of working here. So let's go back to the image and talk about it. Get a real strong sense of just a few colors. See a color idea here, another one here, another one here, another one here, and here. We don't have little splotches of color that end up creating a chaos of all different kinds of colors happening in an overwhelming pattern. The other thing that's beautiful for me in this image is as I move from one idea or image to the next, colors change. The beach has one color vibe or a feeling of color hue, the water another in this area of the sky that forms a real strong shape, another here. Overall there's a color vibe here and an overall color vibe on this subject, the Wharfhouse, in the background. And in addition to that, when you move from one subject to the next, it's a powerful sense of beautiful dynamic color relationship. This is magenta violet, this is yellow green, Violet and yellow are opposites on the painter's color wheel. Magenta and green opposites from the printer's color wheel. We can move in a dynamic way here between red and green from the painter's color wheel. We can move in a beautifully dynamic way here from yellow to blue, pair of opposite colors from the printer's color wheel. Just really love the way William has worked with color. Only change that I might make to this image is just get rid of a few areas of high contrast that don't really have anything to do with the overall image, particularly where you have high contrast, a very strong spot of high contrast where you have perspective overlay. You already have two things merging. Just doing that kind of digital gardening can help to simplify. Here is before and here is after. Before and after. I want to say a big thank you to William and all of the people who just participated in my workshop. Generosity twice. The location workshops are what allow me to keep the lights on and make my tutorials free on the Mindful Eye, and then participants that are generous enough to allow their images to be shared in this way. They increase the potential that people that for whatever reason can't go to a location workshop, they can still be inspired by the images from these workshops and learn quite a bit. Would love to hear your feedback about the video today. Want to say a huge thank you to you for being here, giving me a chance to teach online. Hope to see you again very soon on the Mindful Eye.